Hi, and welcome back to the New York Phil Audition Challenge. This is week 6, and so we take a look at our final excerpt, Debussy La Mer. Now, I've always found this Debussy to be among the most difficult excerpts. For one thing, it's long, which isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes short excerpts can be terrifying because you only get a short time to make your mark. But it's not only lengthy, but the difficulties never stop because there are constant dynamic changes and a constant accelerando that happens through the later two-thirds of the excerpt. Not only that, but because so much of the excerpt is in the higher registers, control of sound quality is so important and so difficult. You're working with a short string. So let's take a look as I pull this back up on my computer screen. Getting this one off the ground can be a challenge as well. It's an odd start, isn't it, with a trill? The short answer is to do whatever works, but I do see many people either trying a so-called vibrato trill or asking if it's all right. If it sounds good, it's all right, but I've never found it a very stable way to start an excerpt. So the vibrato trill is where let's say you're trilling from 2 to 3, you get the third finger close to the string, and just by sort of vibrating, you make the trill. To me, it has a different sound. It's not as clean as... Not to mention that it's not proper violin technique. Like I said, do what works. But I've always found just a straight 2-3 trill doesn't have to be too fast. And you may notice, too, that despite what's marked in the audition packet, I do start this one on a down bow, and I play it as it comes so that I can make the crescendo on a down bow and end up up bow for the subito pianissimo. So even though I trill on a second finger, for the run of 16th notes, I switch that to a third. And that means that I'm going across over the strings on a half step, which in a fast passage like this is preferable because it makes it very smooth. In expressive playing, you don't want to do that because it sounds odd to cross on a half step. But here we go, and you have your 4 ready and down in advance. Then right back to a second finger. That's not a very big crescendo during that trill. It's enough just to have the notes there and steady. Down to first position. And I think of this crescendo as going to the piano. So, a word about tempo. Looking at this excerpt overall, you can see that the later two-thirds of it, as I say, has an accelerando. Therefore, there's no need to start this very quickly. And many people dive right into this one without considering the tempo that they want. So here is a great spot to imagine the tempo that you'd like. And it's a moderate tempo, moderate excerpt to start. Therefore, I think of that when I'm going to start the whole thing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So the 16th's not too fast. I do allow the bow to come off, but it's not that kind of off. I also play this as it comes. I don't do all the hooks that they have in here. Now, you might ask, if I were taking this audition, would I still change the bowings? For something like this, I would, because I don't feel that it changes the sound, and it's much more comfortable for me. So, to achieve that stroke, you need to release the bow on the last note of the slur. So you can certainly practice it on the string just to make sure that it's even. This mixing of slurs and separates can be pretty difficult for some people. Kreutzer 2 with all the bowing variations is a great one to practice for that. You'll notice that I put a little bit of emphasis on the grace notes. I think as long as it doesn't sound like an accent, it helps set them off. That crescendo, you're starting at piano, so it goes above piano, and then subito. This one also goes above piano for a subito. Now here it's marked expressif. I love that French word. So obviously expressive. I hear some people coming in, and yeah, that's not the sound for this moment in the waves. If it helps, you can think of that as a delayed expressive mark, that it's not from the very front of the downbeat, but just after. And that crescendo, you can call it to mezzo, mezzo something. Strangely, these rests people often don't count accurately. Da, 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 1, 2, 3, boom. Usually folks jump in early, so don't be one of those. The first one I did all in second position, but this one I reach up to a 3 so that I can be ready for a third position. Another subito. And now here's where the dynamics get counterintuitive. And so often, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, when committees hear this excerpt, folks aren't playing the dynamic markings that are printed there. So it bears some careful looking, and you sometimes have to force your arm to do things that may not be natural. But the fact is that this crescendo goes up, and then the 2 downbeats later is the low point again. So it can be hard for some folks to want to keep moving the bow on an up bow and to make that dim. But that is what he's asking. And it makes sense if you think of this as a waves movement. So what happens most of the time is that there are extra accents or else dynamics that don't work in a wave. They have peaks and sharp peaks and valleys as opposed to these smooth waves that are actually marked there. Crescendo during this node. And then subito again. So one of the challenges is to get yourself low enough in the bow so that you're not having to squeeze, which is just death for that moment. So Use the bow to get yourself back to the middle. And around here, stay near the frog, so that you're doing that in the middle to lower half. Then you have plenty of bow for that. I shift up to a 2, and that shift should take place before the bow gets there. Shift, and then up to an F sharp. Why can't I do it when I'm making a point? And same deal here. So you really have to use the bow. So I stay in position. I see a lot of people shift down here. Not only does that make it more likely that you're going to break the line, but I find it shifting down to a 4 is for me going to be less reliable than shifting down to a 2 on the next set of notes. Back up to a 1. This is a bit of a reach, but I find worth it so that I can leave my second finger down. Same fingering pattern. So in all of this, and I know some of it I'm playing under tempo, but in all of this I leave the bow on the string. In fact, the bow hasn't really come off the string in strokes since. Again, that's to give me ultimate control of the dynamic and the articulation. The only reason I would need to come off would be to really set notes apart. And these are waves. It doesn't need that. So even here in these duples, I don't suddenly, no. And so this has all been complex enough without that little marking en animant, beaucoup. So that means getting faster, not immediately faster, even though some conductors juice it right on the marking. But it means getting faster, and while you do have plenty of time to do that, somehow this passage wants to resist it. And so all of these, through all these patterns, you've got to be constantly leaning forward. It's the opposite of what you want to do in most excerpts. The only time that I don't like to think of leaning forward is during those higher notes. I find that it doesn't help my sound to really, but as soon as they're done, to let it flow. Especially in those duples, that's an easy place for it to want to pull back. So a metronome is helpful here, but as you know, metronomes don't accelerate. So a metronome will tell you if you're playing it steadily. Some folks have found a website or a program online where you can program in an accelerando. That could be helpful if you want to have the feeling of being pushed. Otherwise, just record yourself playing through this and see if you can feel the pulse keep accelerating, and notice if there's a point where it ever feels like it wants to pull back. After the blank page for page turns, I go down to 4th position, 2, 4, 1, 3, then back up to the familiar 2. Again, that you want to do in the lower half of the bow, so that you have bow for that long down bow. This is finally, you go all the way up to fortissimo, so use more bow. And again, the reason not to come off the string for this is that to keep it as loud as it needs to be, as powerful as it needs to be, if you came off the string, you'd have to there are limited ways to get that power in such short notes way up high on the violin. If it were down on the G string, then yes, come off the string, you can get that power, but it just ends up sounding a little silly. So you keep control of the sound. You can really use bow. Now it's a 2, 4 accents. Now it's interesting, right here, that is big number 38. In some editions of this piece and of this excerpt, there's a modification where at big number 38, they correct it to be like the following bars. Hopefully with the same top D. But in this copy that you've been given, they don't do that. So you play what's here. I change bowing sometimes, but I'm not going to change notes from materials that they provide. So finally, the last 2 bars, it's not immediately slow, but it starts getting slower there. So feel free to relax it there. So that excerpt is it combines a lot of challenges. My advice is to separate the challenges. If it's a bow stroke that's giving you problem, for example, the passage, then get rid of the bow stroke for the moment. Make sure that it's totally even in the left hand and in the right hand on the string. And only then lift off the notes that need to be lifted off. If it's a problem of dynamics, then I would slow the tempo down and really look at how much bow you're using on various notes, because usually that's going to tell you which notes are loud and soft. It doesn't have to be super complicated. And then put the pieces together and have the accelerando be the last thing that you add on. That keeps the adrenaline going. So, best of luck with this one, and as with all of these, you're going to get another chance at it later on. But let me see your best take of La Mer, and thanks for being part of the challenge. I'll see you next time, next week.